All right. Thanks and good evening to those of you who are tuning in. It's been quite a while since I've done something like this. Life gets busy, and we often forget the things that are important to do. And quite frankly, this felt right to do tonight on yet another anniversary of 9/11. I'm getting sick of all the really bad shit happening in September, if I'm being entirely honest. Um, this is just yet another thing that's an indication of the growing division inside this country. Uh, at the end of this little talk tonight, I'll have a Q&A session where I'll address some additional comments or questions anybody has. So feel free to put them in the channel comments themselves or in the Discord channel. I'll reference both of them towards the end. So as I sat here putting the order of things together for this video, something kind of occurred to me. Now, things didn't really used to be this way. Now, you younger guys have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, but you used to be able to have civil disagreements with people and have it be somewhat rational and carry forward at the end of the day. Hell, I remember being in school with people who were openly socialist or even communist, and yeah, that was actually a thing back when I was in high school. It was considered to be the sort of edgelord hot take of the day, wearing your Che Guevara t-shirts mixed in with those Pink Floyd and Rage Against the Machine t-shirts. People who thought they were rebelling against a system that didn't care, only to be looked at by everybody else as if they were some sort of degenerate. I mean, they were mostly, but that's kind of besides the point. It's a lot of dumb kids, myself included, arguing about things we knew nothing about. There's no lived experience. We had no reality to ground ourselves in, and even back then it was considered to be righteous to show as much virtue as possible in the advocation of any sort of social policy. It's really easy to say things like feed the poor, healthcare for all. Things that all sound really good at the heart, but they have no practical application to how life really works. Sure as hell doesn't answer the question who's going to pay for it. We had no concept of what it meant to work for a living, with that living being your own life on the line. God forbid, a whole ass family depending on you. No wife, no kids. Just you, probably living either with roommates or a parent, and really all you did is look towards the next party or whatever the hell it was you were into at that particular time. It just sounded good to say it. It was safe because nobody could really question you. I mean, how the hell could they? It was a virtuous thing to say, and you were the virtuous one. To question that would imply you were somehow not virtuous. All that being said, it was an exercise in futility. No one took it particularly seriously. It was just a part of your civics or social studies class. Life went on. The internet was alive, but it was in its infancy. There wasn't some dying need to constantly check your phone and see what some celebrity was doing that had no impact on your life. I mean, sure, idolism existed, but it was mostly limited to things like MTV. I mean, don't worry. Even when I was in school, MTV hardly played music, so that's apparently nothing new under the sun. So where did it change? Where did it all start going wrong? Well, I have my theories, but I'm going to be entirely honest, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Today I want to talk about a phenomena I'm coining the Gracchi line, and how it pertains to the death of Mr. Kirk. I would really love to put together a far more comprehensive analysis of all this, but I'm rather limited to what I can do in a single day. I'm fairly convinced you could write a whole ass dissertation on this subject, but I'll do my best to struggle and keep my head above water as I hit a subject that's so far above my pay grade, it's crazy. To that end, let's go ahead and get started. So, the Gracchi line. This is a reference to the Gracchi brothers. The Gracchi brothers Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus and Gaius Sempronius Gracchus. They lived in the old Roman Republic, circa 163 to 121 BCE. They're the great-grandchildren of Scipio Africanus. That's the one credited for leading the Romans out of the stymied hellhole that was the Second Punic War. While I never fought Hannibal directly, Scipio was a legend among Romans. This is fairly important for understanding why what happens to the Gracchi brothers is just so unbelievable. In Roman history, your Roman lineage was extremely, extremely important. And your family name could almost make you immune to anything. And that's kind of what these guys were. And this is even more unbelievable once we get to their sort of political career down the road. Both of these brothers would wind up holding a title called Tribune of the Plebs. For those of you not super well versed in ancient Roman, oh my god, I would love to be able to speak correctly. For those of you not well versed in ancient Roman Republican era government, that's a whole ass mouthful. The tribunes were directly elected by the plebeians, or the lower class of the city. The senators were almost always above the patrician. The senators were almost always of patrician or elite status. This position was born out of social reform far before the Gracchi. Among other things, tribunes' powers and responsibilities were kind of as such. First and foremost, they could block the actions of magistrates, including consuls and praetors, even senatorial decrees, if it was deemed harmful to the citizenry of Rome. They had the right to convene the plebeian assembly, so they could summon plebeians, propose legislation, hold votes, and laws passed in this assembly eventually became binding on all Romans. They could even convene the Senate, basically summon them, and preside over the Senate in certain contexts. But most importantly, they were sacrosanct. I hate that word. Harming them was considered a capital offense. They were not to be touched, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. They were considered to be invulnerable while in their official position. Now, while not an official position, people that have a large media presence today can do many of the same things, and we see it all the time when it comes to people being platformed, deplatformed. We see it when it comes to public influence and the pressure it can put on existing politicians. Hell, we saw it in the last election with the podcast debacle when it came to a particular candidate not engaging with one of these influencers and then suddenly dropping drastically in the polls as a result. Influence may not have a legal standing to directly challenge legal legislation, but in all but name, they are what we would call modern tribunes. Our votes are the views in which they are given, which lends to the platform they can launch from. So what is the Gracchi line? To understand this, we're going to have to dig into a little bit of what happened to both of them. They were both very key proponents of social reform. The removal of power from elite institutions. Tiberius, the older, initially pushed for a great deal of land reform. He was clubbed to death on the Capitoline Hill in 133. And again, I kind of want to loop back to the fact that this position was considered sacrosanct. It was a capital offense to do anything to them. Not only that, he had the weight of a literal Roman legend behind his family name. For this man to have been killed would have completely upset everything in Rome at the time. And what he was known for is he was pushing for a great deal of land reform. Just redistributing it away from the patricians and distributing it more towards the lower class, because at the time there was a lot of social instability as people were moving and flooding Rome, as agriculture started to suffer. A lot of different things going on around that time. Now, Gaius, who tried to carry on his brother's work by expanding the land reform into things like the grain dole, court reforms, roadworks, colonization projects, and citizenship for conquered area, it met his end in a senatorial crackdown, which was basically the elites of the time deciding that they were going to kill people who disagreed with them. Outstanding work. Now, both of these events are going to lead to a greater and broader slew of political violence, which will continue to escalate until some 40 years later when Marius and Sulla engage in their civil war, the first of which that'll occur in Rome. Well, how does it start? Well, it starts with political maneuvering, and then when Sulla's authority is challenged, he marched his legions on Rome. Too many people, without a real knowledge of history, credit the ultimate downfall of the Roman Republic to the Caesars. From Julius's famed crossing of the Rubicon to Octavian, or more popularly as we know him, Augustus's final cementation of princeps, or first citizen, because he was never actually an emperor. He was never actually a dictator. He never held the title of Rex. He was known as the first citizen, princeps. And all of that was cemented after the end of the Caesarian faction that split off, led by Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and that was in Alexandria, Egypt. Ultimately, what I want to highlight here is what happened in the aftermath of the Gracchi brothers and their death. So, prior to 133, violence within Rome itself was extremely rare and considered sacrilegious. Political disputes played out through law courts, elections, and senatorial tomfoolery. The murder of Tiberius was actually the first bloodshed inside the Pomerium, which is the city along the exterior edge of Rome. There was basically this invisible line that was referred to as the Pomerium. And there were rules about what could and could not cross inside the Pomerium. Think of it as ancient Rome's gun-free zone. Amusingly as that is to think about with the signs, but that's more or less what it was. And once Tiberius was killed, it all of a sudden became thinkable to kill your opponents when persuasion failed. After his death, Rome's political class began splitting into two camps. The Optimates, which were the aristocrats of the time, the defenders of senatorial authority, tradition, and elite privilege, or your populares, and these are politicians directly appealing to the plebeian assembly. They were your vox populi. They spoke for the people. They had the weight of the masses behind them. And it wasn't really formalized into party politics, but that's more or less what it was at the time. So then we move to Gaius. And he pushed his reforms even further than his brothers, and he started to build a mass political base. He was while his older brother was a tribune, he didn't have the full weight of the people behind him. Gaius really rallied the full plebeian assembly behind him. It was the first time anything like this had been done. And unfortunately, after his death in 121, and this was after the Senate issued their first, how do you even say this, consultum ultimatum, basically a state of emergency. It normalized the idea that the Senate could use force and extraordinary decrees against domestic opponents. Sounds almost like executive orders to me. So what is this precedent? It's the Senate authorizing violence to preserve order instead of finding a compromise. And I want you to keep in mind as we go through this, you can draw so many similarities to how modern day politics and social dynamics actually work. The names have changed, the sides have flipped, but there's nothing new under the sun. So the Tribunate was increasingly weaponized as a reform office. It kind of became the office you went to if you wanted to really cause some sort of change within the government. And that state of emergency winds up becoming a recurring tool in some of these later crises. Just for an example, it was apparently used against Saturnius in 100 BCE and against Catiline in 63. I apologize. These are just reference marks that I have out of doing some of my research today. I'm not 100% familiar with either of these. So some of these popular leaders now knew the risks. Pushing too far would cost them their lives. But it also inspired others to kind of do what the Gracchus did. And I think that's something that we're going to start to see more and more. So this winds up starting a very long arc towards civil war. So after the Gracchi line was crossed, political disputes were no longer just constitutional. They escalated into street battles, armed gangs, purges. And again, I want to point out, and I cannot stress the importance, that you couldn't even be a member of the military and cross into the Pomerium. This is something that happens later on to Julius Caesar, and one of the ways that the Senate tries to fuck him out of his consulship, telling him he has to be in person, but he can't actually cross the Pomerium because he's a member of the military, so he has to resign on the spot before he crosses the Pomerium. It's a whole thing. The Pomerium was a big deal. And to be a member of the military, to have weapons inside of it, to commit violence inside of it, it wasn't just tied to legal framework. It was a part of the religion. So, as things escalated in street battles and armed gangs and gladiators and daggers and swords and all that started becoming more and more commonplace, you sort of see the decline and the degeneration of the social fabric which made up Rome in the first place. So, within 2 generations, the climate of Rome shifted from what it was into Marius and Sulla, and these are the first outright civil wars, and this occurs in 88 to 82 BC. And you got to remember, this is about 40 years after the Gracchus were killed. So Marius versus Sulla, that was the first civil war. And then you had, of course, Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus, which we historically know as the first triumvirate. And then finally the collapse of the Republic into its more imperial focus. So with all these things said, let's focus on some immediate results in the aftermath. The thing that everybody's actually scared of, or should be scared of, rather. So Sulla is considered to be the first of the tyrants of the Republican era, and while he was a dictator, which is something that had a widely different connotation in ancient Rome, he normalized the practice of something called proscriptions. This isn't like a medical prescription, this is a proscription. And this isn't just some political purge either. He used this to shape the entire landscape of Rome. It was an instrument of fear, mass suffering, personal wealth transference to himself, his allies, and those he wanted to use to further his own ambitions. Well, what were they? Well, after defeating the Marian faction at the Battle of the Colline Gate, Sulla was made dictator. And this is to understand what a dictator was in ancient Rome. It's not what we think of. It's not your Hitlers or your Stalins or your Mussolinis. Your dictators at the time were more or less elected officials that were decreed by the Senate. So, in ancient Rome, you had two leaders that were elected every single year, referred to as consuls. And while this worked to varying success, in times of emergency, the Senate could declare a dictator, which is a one-man rule. And that's what Sulla winds up becoming. And to consolidate his power, he issues lists of proscribed men who were declared outlaws whose lives and property were forfeit. And these lists were published everywhere in Rome. Now here's what made them horrible. Anyone who was on that list could be killed by a citizen of Rome with impunity, and harboring one was punishable by death. I want you to imagine that. Whatever city you live in, if the mayor just puts out a fucking list and says, yeah, anybody on this list, they're no longer people. You can kill them at will and take their stuff. That's what a prescription was. So, scale-wise, some of these sources give different numbers, but they all essentially agree that the violence was massive. For example, Plutarch says it was about 520 senators and 2,600 equestrians. Appian says it was about 4,800. So many people were caught up through false accusations, or family ties. Because again, remember, family lineage is extremely important. So if you happen to be a relative of a proscribed man, well, that transferred to you. And sometimes it was just opportunism. So, in terms of how this wealth transference worked, all of the property was confiscated and then auctioned off to the public very cheaply, pennies on the dollar, as it were. Sulla and all his allies enriched themselves. They bought estates. It was nuts. The families that survived were stripped of wealth and dignity. Sons and grandsons were barred from public office. Again, family lineage being prescribed basically destroyed your entire family. Rome became a city of public executions. Heads of the proscribed were displayed on the rostra in the forum as a warning to everybody else. And you're going to have to forgive me, I'm not fantastic with some of these Latin words. If any of you are actually native Latin speakers, I apologize. I'm probably destroying these. Informants and assassins thrived. Personal feuds could be settled by getting somebody's name added to the list. Didn't like somebody, had an argument with them, fuck it, add them to the list, they're dead. Neighbors betrayed neighbors for profit. So, even those not prescribed really kind of lived in fear. Anyone wealthy enough to be envied could become a target. Entire families were reduced to nothing overnight. Violence was everywhere. Soldiers carried out murder in the streets. Citizens learned that law could be bent to just raw force. If you could move around in a gang, maybe somebody misheard and they thought your name was on the prescription list and you died. Well, as long as you thought you were doing the will of Rome's dictator, you'd never be punished for it. So these long-term consequences, this normalization of mass political killings, Sulla really set the precedent for these later purges under the triumvirs. So later on, you had prescriptions done by Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. So this was not just isolated to one psychotic tyrant towards the beginning, even the ones that came to the end. we're still doing it. Class war rhetoric intensified. The optimates versus the populares hardened with common plebs repeatedly drawn into elite feuds. Almost every institution had lost faith, in the people. Well, all this happened a really long time ago, right? This couldn't possibly matter at all in the modern world. Let's take a look at that. Public lists and exposure. Modern doxing and cancel campaigns, your personal data, addresses, employers, family information spread online, aims to remove privacy and expose the individual to harassment. You can have deplatforming lists that circle and just blacklist certain voices. Both of these rely on public exposure to isolate and endanger targets. Granted, it's not state-backed, but it's enforced by crowd actions or platform policies. Punishment comes through social media mobs, employers pressure to fire somebody, tech firms shutting down accounts, being debanked, being deplatformed, having ad revenue campaigns entirely suspended. This isn't a boycott. This is a total disruption of an individual's life. Victims can lose jobs and sponsorships, digital platforms, income streams. Both can cascade into family suffering and social isolationism. Prescriptions, confiscated wealth, and deplatforming, doxing, all of that crap can entirely collapse livelihoods. Fear of being targeted creates self-censorship and conformity. And we're already seeing this now. So many people are canceling their tours. People are terrified to speak in public now. I mean, in all of these cases, these effects spread far beyond those that were directly hit by this. Opportunists are going to exploit this outrage for clout, followers, profit. They're going to monetize outrage content. They're going to use doxing to knock out competitions. Because think about what happens now. In the wake of the Charlie Kirk business, if you get doxed, you're going to be worried there's going to be somebody out there looking down the barrel of a 30-06. Just waiting. And both of these systems just incentivize opportunism at the expense of any justice. Both of these practices, it's your logic. That logic is public exposure, fear, economic and social ruin. They work by making somebody a public target, stripping their protection, and incentivizing the mob to join in their downfall. They spread fear. It's terrorism. But while we haven't necessarily hit that scale yet, we crossed the line. Mr. Kirk's death represents a crossing of this cracky line. It's the point at which it becomes normalized to murder civilians and those with the influence in the public sphere, instead of attempting to win an argument through persuasion. Whether your implement of murder is a club, a knife, bullet, the outcome's the same. Voices of the individual are shut down and they succumb to terror. Cycle of retaliation is going to continue, and we're all going to suffer for it. Whether you agreed with the man's views or opposed them, we have to all agree that resorting to the murder of an individual is too much. The slide into political violence is only going to be accelerated as a result of this line being crossed, and so help me God, if we continue down this path, it's not going to be long before modern prescriptions become state sanctioned and we have our own version of SOLA. Each side's going to point to the other and say, well, they did, but they did, but enough. Just enough. You have to look at the nation right now. Just take a look at it. Unplug from everything. Look at what's around you. We have so much other shit we should be worrying about. Declining birth rates, the destruction of the middle class, the AI poverty crisis that is just around the corner. There's so many things that are on the way. And we're still sitting here fighting over whether some guy you agree with on the internet is some sort of existential threat to your belief system. Why? For what? Is it really so hard to believe that if your political opposites continue to draw breath in the world, that in fact will not end the world in fire and brimstone? This isn't some call to action. It's a call for everybody to calm the fuck down. Take a minute to understand that killing a man is not going to make these issues go away. It doesn't change the fundamental nature of an argument. Killing a man makes him a martyr and ensures the cycle of violence is going to continue to escalate. I don't want to live in an America where we have public prescriptions. I don't want to live in an America where we stop trusting our neighbors. I don't want to live in an America where we have to look over our shoulder at all times just to see if the person behind us is carrying a blade with our name etched in blood. Left or right, upper and lower class. Stop being a willing participant in a game that gets a small amount of people rich at the expense of your livelihood. There's going to be a small interlude, and then I'll address whatever questions you guys have. All right, it just occurred to me that I didn't actually swap the media over, so all you guys heard was silence for the last 5 minutes. I apologize. There was supposed to be music playing in the background. That's my fault. I don't do this a whole lot. I make mistakes. Sorry. All right. So a couple things that couple comments that come out of chat here. So first, Rice says, honestly, resorting to the action means you lost the debate because you couldn't prove him wrong. Your only option was to shut him up permanently, and that floodgate is opened. I'm actually going to counter that a little bit. It doesn't mean you lost the debate. It means you refused to take part in it in the first place, and that's what the political process in the United States is about. It's two opposing sides coming together, having an argument, and letting the audience decide for themselves who made the better points. It's not. It's a subversion of the process that we are supposed to use in order to come to a decision. The whole point of what I'm trying to get across here is that by engaging in some sort of political violence, you're not helping anything. You're subverting the entire process and sliding the Overton window to a completely different scale. The follow-up comment to that, interesting that's a takeaway and not from Melissa Hortman and her husband's murderer. So in case you're not familiar with who that is, those are the politicians in Minnesota that were murdered in their home. That in and of itself is first and foremost, let's start something categorically. Nobody should be killed for what they believe in. Okay, let's just set that as a baseline so there can be no confusion. Okay. That said, historically, violence against politicians and people in power is not uncommon. I forget the exact numbers off the top of my head, but something like 8 out of 50 presidents or presidential candidates have either been shot and killed or had an attempted assassination. It really is the most dangerous job in the United States, just on a percentage basis, in terms of all of that. Now, it gets worse as you slide out of the top-down scale. It's expected. It's almost expected by people that leaders are going to have violence targeted against them. That's not what this Gracchi line is supposed to represent. It's supposed to represent what happens when that violence shifts to people who speak on behalf of others. So it doesn't necessarily qualify when you're talking about people who sit in the Senate or the House of Representatives. Again, all violence is bad. Nobody should be assassinated, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to continue to repeat that. But this particular line is an indication that the violence has actually shifted to a far more unhealthy state. And then let's see. Also assuming that it stems truly from a Dem versus Republican, not for a murder involving an individual who recently spoke about a topic the government would like people to not talk about. I'm not entirely sure which portion of this you're getting at. Are you implying that this could have been state-sponsored? Because that does take on a slightly different tint. I mean, it doesn't change the overall narrative of what the Gracchi line is and sort of what it represents in escalating political tensions and violence and all of that, but there is a lot of assumption that this could have been state-sponsored right now. And I'm going to be entirely honest, I unplugged from the news a long time ago. I've watched some of Charlie Kirk's work. Um, I I mean, I'm familiar with him like I'm familiar with just about anybody else in this particular space, but I wouldn't say I followed him. But he wasn't on my feed, if that gives you any indication. Now, as far as whether this stems from partisan politics, it almost certainly does. Not particularly, only that somebody else who follows an ideology would also like to help stop the process of the files being brought up. I'm assuming we're talking about the Epstein files. So I'm going to be entirely honest. I stopped following this whole Epstein thing a long time ago. I sort of came to the realization that those in power will ensure that their names are not on that list. Um, well, all the ensuing manhunt begs the question to me is, hey, we had another guy get on a roof, had a clear shot, and all of the sudden, uh, somebody who is largely untrained, at least according to any media report that I've seen. Again, I'm less focused on the event itself and more focused on what it sort of means to the nation as a whole in terms of murdering civilians who really speak up or against anything. Um, I suppose I could do a little bit of work on it and potentially follow it up with a different episode, but it's hard for me to bring those two things together. Um, I don't know that some random person would take the time to do all of this just over. Well, I'm getting a little distracted. I'll finish the thought first. I don't know that some random person necessarily cares what some influencer has to say about the Epstein files. Right? I don't necessarily think that that's something that a regular person would be targeted for. Uh, really, that's a broad comment. I just context. Okay. Yeah, it's just I just don't know that a normal person would have gone after Kirk for his opinions on the Epstein files. Again, I know very little about it. I know nothing about the alleged suspect. I don't even really know what the hell Charlie Kirk was even talking about at Utah when all of this happened. I don't think. God, I can't even remember the last thing of his that I saw 6 months ago, maybe when he was talking at a California campus, and it was about abortion rights. Maybe I don't even remember. It was a long time ago. Well, the shot. Well, the shot heard around the world was the start of the American Revolution, my man. And that had to do with the Boston Massacre. Or if you want to be a little bit more modern, I suppose that would have been the shot heard around the world would have been the fucking assassination of Franz Ferdinand that led to World War One. But again, I don't necessarily think that the two things apply. One applies to a broader revolution, and the other applies more towards sanctioned terrorism against standard civilians. Um, I understand what you're implying. Uh, it's just slightly different in context, my man. So, at the end of all of this, um, I don't know who this is going to reach. I don't know if this is going to ever touch the ears of more than more than a dozen people out there in the world, but pay very close attention to what happens over the next 5 years. As it took 40 years to make the leap from the Gracchi brothers to Sola, but in the digital age, things move much quicker. I'd be very worried about what the hell is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, because as I was putting some of this together, I was looking at some statistics about generational perspectives, and we'll start at the silent generation, I think they're called, just because they still have some people, like they're quickly dying off because they're at that age, but they give civil war in the United States something like a 10% chance. Boomers, it goes up to about 20. Gen X, it's like 35. Millennials, it's like 40. And then you get down to like Zoomers and late Zoomers, it's like 60%. Like, as you get younger, the divide between people gets wider. And that should, honest to God, fucking terrify people. Because when that switch flips, that what's the old expression? You can't unring a bell. And once that bell gets rang, all hell's gonna break loose. So, take care of yourselves and pay attention. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you hear somebody talking that you don't particularly agree with, roll your eyes and move on. It's not going to be the end of your life or the end of the world if this person continues to have a platform or continues to speak or whichever else. It's not going to be the end of anything. It's going to be some sort of clickbait nonsense to get you to watch some video so some company can sell you fucking Ridge wallets or, God, what are the other ones that I've seen right now? Some stupid game to download. Every time you watch one of these things, somebody's making money somewhere. And that's really all it comes down to. You have to remember that you are always the product, the individual. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. Good night.